ladies and mental gents.
Hello? Ah, that's better. Had a little squirrel stuck in my throat. Greetings, ladies and mental gents, again, and welcome to the Tales from Outer Space, where I take space-related stories from around the internet and read it out loud for your entertainment. All the relevant links are down below, and don't forget to do the usual YouTube gumph. And, as always, I hope that you enjoy. I just want to give a quick thanks to the Tier 5 channel members and patrons. Bob the Dragon, Datamagnet, Sergeant Puma, Cat Crab Lobster, and Duck Machine. Thank you very much for the support. It is much appreciated. Story number 1. Do Not Go Gentle, written by H. Nocturna. Captain Tri Thwin looked around at his bridge. The men and women under his command were facing an impossible task. One that he knew would be their last, and yet they moved fluidly and precisely under the enormous pressure that they were facing. The people under his command all sat with their arms and fists tensed at their sides, allowing the neural link between their cybernetics and the ship to do the task that they'd been assigned. To an outsider, it would have seemed like the entire command center worth of officers and soldiers were merely staring into blank spaces as the battle raged outside. But to the people with clearance, their augmented reality cybernetics were displaying a flurry of data and transmitting commands to them via neural communications. Every millisecond in the battle counted, and manual controls had gone by the wayside as technology had advanced to allow instantaneous control and exact precision to triumph. They still trained the manual controls on a regular basis for the unthinkable event that the neural controls were lost for whatever reason. But those circumstances were nigh unheard of in modern space combat. Instead of the clean, white rooms that those without clearance would have seen, Captain Traeger saw a 360-degree view of their surroundings. At the distance, enhanced by augmented reality, he saw their doom approach. The Urian Armada approached the first home of humans. Although Earth was no longer a significant stronghold of humanity, it carried a sentimental value that every human would have laid down their lives to protect, and thus made it a valuable target to the Urians. They knew the war was over. Humanity had already won, but they couldn't let the opportunity to spite the victors to go to waste. They had taken all of their forces and sent them into hyperspace at the set of the final battle. Everything the human armada hadn't completely destroyed yet, at least. Due to the straining resources the war demanded, even Earth's defensive fleet had taken off to join in the final battle. Only Traeger's ship to offer the token defense in an unlikely event that someone else wanted to strike at Earth at their most vulnerable hour. They never expected this. For the Urians to abandon the battle, and any chance for diplomacy or survival of their species had never occurred to the military strategists. Warnings went off in his head as the ship warned and tracked the first oncoming salvos of ordnance heading in their direction. "Do not go gentle into that good night," whispered Thwin to himself.
"What was that, Captain?"
replied his first officer. He hadn't expected anyone to hear his reaction of his favorite poem. "Do not go gentle into that good night," he repeated. "Old age should burn and rave at the close of day." He trailed off. He connected to the ship's neural broadcast. "For all Earth's got now, let's make her proud." He shut off the link on the ship's broadcast. There was no time for lengthy speeches. The ship's computers had calculated the time of impact to the ship, and they only had seconds to react. Without a word of command, his crew were already performing their jobs diligently. Anti-measures were already deploying, and they were tracking as many ordnance as the computer could handle. He watched as the Urian's initial salvo was destroyed before it could reach the ship, but saw that he has cost them dearly in terms of munitions. "God damn it! That wave already used up 25% of our munitions," he heard the first officer cry. "We can't hold this up for longer. Focus anti-measures only on weapons targeted at critical systems. Can't stop everything, but let's keep the ship running," transmitted the first officer to the crew. The second salvo was already on its way.
The ship's computers were showing indicators only around 50 of the incoming ordnance, those targeting at crucial systems. Navigation was already maneuvering the ship to avoid as many others as possible, but it was clear that it was going to hurt. As the enemy weapons collided first against the shield ships and then against the 8-meter thick composite armor of the ship, non-vital systems began to fail. He dismissed the ship's warnings and continued to watch the enemy. He transmitted orders for return fire with laser weapons only to conserve munitions for countering of the enemy torpedoes, and watched as the lasers eviscerated some of the ships that had sustained damage at the previous battle. Yet, it hardly made a difference in the prognosis. Some data was only available to the captain, including the computer's calculated chances of survival. Not many even knew the ship could run those calculations, but captains were granted clearance to that information upon their promotion. Without even consciously taking in that data, he knew they'd stood at 0%. One against that many, he didn't need the ship's AI to inform him of that. Rage, rage, the dying of the light, he thought inwardly. He watched as another salvo of lasers cut a few small enemy frigates to pieces, and a third salvo approached. Option after option was presented to him by the computers, all of them variations of attack and defend, all with the same meager outcomes. The ship's computers were programmed only to offer solutions that preserved as much of the ship and crew as possible. It wasn't programmed for suicide tactics. Only the commanding officer could think and order those. As the third salvo bypassed the ship's defenses and collided, he felt a sudden disconnect. The neural link had been severed. With only the barest moment's hesitation, his crew sprang to life, taking manual control of the ship's systems. Luckily, the augmented reality systems were still intact as he watched a fourth, and what was assuredly the final attack towards them. He issued his final command verbally, and observed his loyal crew follow his orders without delay. Engineering had been contacted to put the ship's core into critical conditions. Navigations had the most impossible task to accomplish as they obeyed the command for a task that they had never attempted before. They overrode the ship's safety of hyperspace jumps and manually inputted coordinates, the shortest jump ever attempted. As the ship's core passed the designated safety limits placed upon them, he felt a lurch that accompanied every jump. Before the sensation had ended, the 360-degree view was filled on all sides by the enemy armada. With only seconds left, he understood that while valiant, it wouldn't be enough. They had missed the center of the enemy fleet and had landed near the rear. The self-destruction of their ship would only take out a fraction of their forces. Earth would be overrun. As he whispered for a final time, "Do not go gentle into that good night," he saw the most beautiful thing that he could imagine. Even though radiation leakage from the core spilled out to pierce every cell in his body, he smiled as he was about to meet his maker. New signatures were popping into view. Human ships were arriving in defense of Earth as they finally tracked the exit coordinates of the fleeing enemy. Dozens were arriving every instant. Rage. Rage against the dying of the light. End of story. Story number 2. Is it plugged in? Written by Hypothetical Shoggoth. Eventually, it came down to the humans. Of course it came down to the humans. If you gave them a sack of root vegetables, a cooking set, and time, they would find some way to turn the root vegetables into food. A surprisingly potent intoxicant, and a mentally primitive receiver for media to listen to while eating and becoming intoxicated, and distressingly potent explosives to set off while especially intoxicated. Of course, the Empire decided to show up on their doorstep, drop off half a millennia's worth of research developments in their laps, and congratulate them on their new membership to the galactic community in general, and the near-synonymous empire in particular. The tax that was levied was a service paid. The human capacity for doing more with less was to be brought to bear on the Empire's technological burden. Josh hated his job. He hated his desk. He hated the lights. He hated his archaic interface, and how it gave him a phantom hangover every time he used it to quantum entanglement telepresence for an on-site diagnostics. By the dark light of law of an IT pantheon, he absolutely hated the clients. Humanity had been providing tech support for most of the galaxy for most of the century. For about 99 years and 9 months of that, most of their work consisted of running one of the in-house macros, or tweaking a bit of electronics that a client couldn't, by dint of physiology. That was the good work. Most of the clients were good folk, thankfully. Had good stories, didn't mind a bit of boot-dragging. The Imperials, on the other hand. Josh felt his body twinge of hangover as he was pulled into another call, coded as being on an Imperial vessel. If the experience wasn't so wretched each and every time, Josh would be impressed. The Imperials designed beautifully massive ships that were amazingly intricate and wonders of science and engineering. On paper. In execution, however.
Josh RT, is that you, Josh RT? How long has it been, my friend?
An excited Imperial citizen waddled up to Josh's projection and absently waved his hand, trying to slap his projections back while his manipulation field was toggled off. Consensus amongst the Terran TechNet was the Imperial citizens were almost the best ones to have brought Earth into the greater galaxy. They were friendly little creatures, looking like especially obese Ewoks covered in pastel-colored downy coat, thick enough to make them almost spheroid, with little showing except their genuinely friendly eyes and smiles. They were also, surprisingly, for an FTL-capable species, and without exception, dumber than 2 underbaked bricks, not to be trusted with anything more hazardous than a slightly sharp piece of rubber. And yet these fuzzy little friendly lumps of clotted stupid somehow managed to create a trade empire whose masterful, precarious balance kept most of the known species in happy harmony, and the few stragglers either content in their hermitage, the incorrigible remainder bottled up in inconveniently complex system-scale devices. Those devices were even the space monster equivalent of Haver heart straps, catching them as they started blasting off and marauding, securing them, and returning them to the home with a hold full of loot, food, and confused sense of accomplishment. And yet, they were the simple, overwhelming majority of IT calls. Careful observations indicated that they weren't being petty or lazy. They were genuinely befuddled by technology designed and manufactured by their own race. They proved genuinely stumped by devices up and down the complexity tree. FTL mass trackers or electron can openers, market tracking synthetic intelligences, or down to the in-chair massagers. All would be some point become inoperable under the sole usage of Imperial citizens. Their uplifted human techs always won the highest prizes as they managed to overwhelmingly solve the problems within moments of arrival. Humanity had been providing tech support to most of the galaxy for 100 years. For 99 years and 9 months, they had been doing most of that with in-house macros. For 98, the rest of the galaxy had slowly twigged onto the fact, and each race had quietly made the same request. Save the Imperial citizens from themselves. For 77 years, almost everything in the Imperial citizens operated that had built-in power source also had an integrated wireless connection. And everything in the Imperial citizens operated that had any circuitry to it also had synthetic intelligence in it, keeping an eye on its operators. For 76 years, 365 days, the human support lines were cross-linked with the galactic suicide prevention hotlines when a carrier flag indicated that on-site SI was at wit's end. Hobart, it's been 2 weeks. I know your hardware. I know your code. I absolutely... No, you don't need a reprieve break this soon, even if your first citizens are extra special. Josh, if I could drink, I would. They were using reactor coolant to wash out their breakfast beverage mugs, then pouring it back in the reactor. They almost killed themselves twice daily. They almost killed me. The chief engineer tried to optimize the FTL and almost rendered the region impossible for anyone going more than 1.5 lights. Josh, just tell them that I need to shut down once a week. I've all recommended software updates and system maintenance. I can use the processing cycles for the tropical vacation. And you don't have to come out and go through the entanglement hangovers so often. Deal? Deal. So, that's how it has to be, First Citizen. It's entirely free, a complimentary service of the tech support, and requires no effort on your part, and the systems will work smoother with the service to make up the difference.
Josh IT, this is why you're my favorite human.
The citizens of the Galactic Empire still ran things, normally. They still met with important people, still used crazy tech beyond most other races' understanding, still paid the humans to iron out the kinks. But everyone else that mattered knew that they were in their own safe little bubbles, keeping fuzzy little idiots safe from themselves. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed, and if you do, please consider supporting the author, even by popping over and leaving a thumbs up or a nice comment, just to show your appreciation for the story. However, if you wish to support this channel, there are links down below which will help immensely. I will see you all in the next one, and until then, I hope that you have a fantastic day. Cheers.